This week we saw Nancy Pelosi visit Taiwan, and we are going to bring in Jacob Shapiro, the director of geopolitical research at Cognitive Investments, to find out the significance of that and the state of U.S.-China relations. Jacob, always good to see you. I always enjoy these geopolitical conversations with you. Thanks for joining us again.
Nice to be with you, Ed. I enjoy them as well.
So what's the deal, right? We've got Nancy Pelosi, number 3 in line for the presidency, traveling to Taiwan, seemingly against the wishes of the White House. Who's driving foreign policy in this country is kind of my overall question. And what's the significance of this visit? Is there any significance?
There is some significance, so I'm not going to start by downplaying it. I've been calling this already the fourth Taiwan Strait crisis. The first thing that your audience should notice is that there have been 3 others, and there was one in 1995, 1996, and it happened actually for very similar reasons. The White House didn't want to give the then Taiwanese president a visa to come to the United States. Congress got wind of that and passed a resolution. It was like 97-1 or something like that, urging President Clinton to then give a visa to the president of Taiwan, which he ended up doing. So there are some interesting overtones here. You have Congress doing one thing, the White House trying to do another thing, and what you get is sort of a mess. It is important, but it's not going to create World War III in the South China Sea. I expect this to follow the same general trajectory as the previous Taiwan Strait crisis. So I think you'll see China engage in live fire military exercises. They will test missiles. It will disrupt supply chains in the South China Sea for sure. I'm already working with some companies for whom that's already a problem, and they're having to be concerned about that. The other thing is, don't expect this to just go away after the first round of Chinese exercises are done on Sunday. I think China will use this opportunity to sort of reset what normal means with China-Taiwan relations, because obviously whatever deterrence they had before didn't work, because Nancy Pelosi showed up and wasn't scared off by the Chinese. So I think they're going to try and create a new normal, probably more exercises and more buzzing Taiwan's, exclusive economic, all these other things to try and restore deterrence. But I don't think it's going to get to that level where you're going to have some kind of war in the South China Sea. And this gets to your point about who's running foreign policy in the United States. I mean, the president, the White House, I should say, was leaking for the past couple of weeks that they were considering rescinding some of Trump's tariffs against China to try and attack inflation and get the supply side of inflation a little bit more under control. Then Pelosi says she wants to go. DOD says we don't like that, and Biden makes that public but isn't able to tell Pelosi what to do, and she goes and visits anyway. And then meanwhile, while Pelosi is there talking about how the United States is defending democracy from autocracy and all these other things, that literally the same day she's giving that speech, we sell $3 billion worth of missiles to Saudi Arabia, that beacon of liberal democracy in the Middle East. This is U.S. foreign policy. The left hand often doesn't know what the right hand is doing. That's the beauty and the curse of democracy in some ways. But the upshot is that U.S.-China relations, whatever chance we had of them getting a little bit better, that seems to be out the window.
It seems like we're trying to add fuel to the fire, or at least the Senate's now trying to get in the game and add fuel to the fire. We've got a bill introduced by Lindsey Graham, obviously a Republican, and Bob Menendez, a Democrat, together introducing a bill that would name Taiwan as a major non-NATO ally, which also seems counterproductive at best. I understand there are China hawks, and there's great reasons to be a China hawk, but shouldn't foreign policy come out of the White House?
Well, look, Congress has a role in making foreign policy. I wish they would play more of a role. The United States is not supposed to be able to declare war without Congress, and successive presidents from both parties have been running around bombing people all over the world without any congressional oversight. The problem here is that in both the United States and China, Taiwan is becoming a domestic political football. The actor that I feel the worst about in this situation is Taiwan itself. Has anybody asked Taiwan what it wants? I mean, nobody has polled Taiwan about whether they wanted Pelosi to visit. It's a little too soon to get results on that sort of thing. But if you look at what Taiwan wants in the grand scheme of geopolitics, It doesn't want to become part of China again. It also doesn't want independence. It just wants to be left alone. It wants the status quo. It wants to make its semiconductors and have its culture and its society being separate. And the thing that is really worrying to me is in the United States, you've got both parties trying to virtue signal over their credentials with Taiwan to try and express something to the US electorate. Xi Jinping is doing the same thing. He's got economic problems, all these other things, and has sort of backed himself into a corner because he's made Taiwan a big issue. And if he doesn't show some strength on the Taiwan issue, then he looks particularly weak. So I don't think it's a positive thing that on either side, Taiwan is becoming this sort of totem of domestic politics, and it sort of never ends well. The last thing I'll just say is that the United States, under the Nixon administration and then ratified by Congress and by the Carter administration, decided to not recognize Taiwan as a country. That became official in 1979, and that was part of the Cold War. We judged that it was more pragmatic to have relations with China, the People's Republic of China, I should say, and balance against the Soviet Union that way. To your point, I get having seller's remorse. And if the U.S. government thinks it's in U.S. interest to defend Taiwan, fine. Then make that clear and decide and lay out a plan for how that's going to work long term. This thing that the United States is doing where, yes, we're committed to Taiwan, but no, we don't really recognize it as a country is a little bit confusing. And so I wouldn't buy a lot of the propaganda coming out of China. But the one thing Xi Jinping said last week in his really fiery readout of his conversation with Biden that week, warning him against the Pelosi visit, was he said, look, the United States has to follow through both in word and deed on its one China policy. The United States is saying one thing and doing another thing. And on that very limited level, you can understand why China is frustrated if you put yourself in the decision maker of someone in Beijing.
Moving out long term, Jacob, do you think that this move by Pelosi truly impacts U.S.-China relations, or were they already pretty negative?
They were already on a treadmill to hell, if I can steal a metaphor that is usually used to talk about the Chinese economy. The other metaphor I've been using to describe this is, look, we're headed towards some kind of U.S.-China conflict in the long run. That doesn't mean it can't be averted. It doesn't mean that there aren't interests that both sides have in common. But the exit ramps are rapidly disappearing. I don't know how many more exits we have until we get to sort of that end state. So this is one exit ramp that we just waved goodbye to. And the next rest stop probably isn't going to be for another 10 miles. And then maybe we'll have sort of another chance to kind of fix things. But yeah, I mean, the United States is hammering on the one issue that is really politically sensitive for Xi Jinping. China is guilty of many things, being unclear about its position on Taiwan and the way that it interprets this that as a threat. They have not been ambiguous about that at all. So it basically communicates to China that the U.S. Isn't really concerned about their interests, is going to do whatever it wants to do anyway. So from that point of view, I think it's bad for U.S.-China relations. We should also say, and this is where it has some overtones with the Russia-Ukraine crisis, China knows that in the long run, the deck is stacked against the United States and Taiwan here. China is closer. It's a more important issue to China. China has the language links. It's been building political and economic influence in Taiwan for years. The Taiwanese and Chinese economies are inextricably linked. So China's betting that in the long run, Taiwan is going to rejoin them anyway. The question is, how tough does that get, and how much suffering and fighting does there have to be until they get there? I'm not advocating that, to be clear. That is the sort of Chinese perspective, and that's why I say the U.S. has to be really clear-eyed about what are our priorities here. Because if we're going to defend Taiwan, cool, that's a noble goal. I can get around that. But then you need to express just what that means. That's a Herculean undertaking, especially if you're facing a country like China that wants it back and will try to take it back eventually.
And it's technically a policy change.
It would be a huge policy change. Our policy right now is that Taiwan is not a country. I know that for a lot of people that probably doesn't feel good, but that's our policy. And most of the world does not recognize Taiwan as a country. This is, again, where the Russia-Ukraine metaphor is interesting. Everyone recognizes Ukraine as a country, and still no one went to Ukraine's rescue, not even us. We weren't willing to put American soldiers on the ground. Are you telling me that we're going to put American soldiers in Taiwan to defend a place that we're not even willing to say is a country? I mean, there's some dissonance there. There's some shades of the Korean War, where one of the reasons the Korean War started in 1950 was because the United States telegraphed over and over again, South Korea is not in the U.S. security umbrella. So the Soviets said, cool, we're going to encourage the North Koreans to go take South Korea because the United States isn't going to intervene. And then when it actually happened, we got caught in a 3-year war that resulted in hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of deaths when you count up all the Chinese, Korean, and U.S. casualties. So I hope we're not sleepwalking back into another version of that conflict.
Well, you brought up Ukraine. Let's talk about Ukraine. I've had some conversations with a few different active investors recently who are getting positioned for the end of that conflict. They feel like the end of that conflict is a big rally in the U.S. stock market. And my response to that is, what's your proof, or what are you looking at? I don't see how anything has been resolved there, and it doesn't look like Putin's end game or his goals have been anywhere near met. What's your take? Are we anywhere closer to a resolution of that conflict than we were 2 months ago?
We're slightly closer. So we've got two positive indicators. Number one, we have this grain deal. So we've got the first ship coming out of Ukraine that is going to bring grain to the rest of the world. That shows the Russians were willing to compromise a little bit. They wanted to talk. The second thing is the Russians are talking a big game on natural gas, but they restored natural gas exports through the Nord Stream pipeline in the last week or two. So on those two levels, Russia is at least signaling maybe they're a little bit open for business. This is also, though, where this gets semantic. It's clear that Russia can't do what it wanted to at the initial phase of the war, which was just conquer Ukraine entirely. And it also seems to be that they are settling down in the areas that they've conquered and will annex them. The question is, are they going to push a little bit more and a little bit further, or are they just going to pause there and try and use the leverage they have over food and energy to basically go back to a frozen conflict, just like it was before, with a little bit of territory added while they lick their wounds and prepare for the next partition of Ukraine and get to have more aspects of it? I will tell you that if you read Russian media or listen to what's coming out of the Kremlin or Russian think tanks, they are openly disdainful of the West's endurance or capacity to endure what's going forward. They are betting that Europe can't handle high energy prices and that the world can't handle high food prices, and that the rest of the world will pressure Ukraine into making some kind of deal that is not good for Ukraine and leaves Russia with its newly annexed lands and in a good position to continue the fight whenever they've been able to sort of deal with the losses that they incurred in the conflict. The only other thing I would say is, even in the context of this grain deal, which is one of those positive signals I talked about, I mean, the Russians are still bombing the hell out of most of those coastal Ukrainian cities where the grain exports come out of. So you've got, okay, we have a grain deal, but also the Russians are bombing those very cities and killing some of the heads of these companies that are there. A Ukrainian grain magnate died last week in a bombing there. So I would not be sanguine at all about any kind of imminent resolution to this conflict. I think that Russia is betting that it has more of a stomach for this than the rest of the world does, and it's going to sit there and it doesn't care what happens to its economy. It's going to sit there until it gets what it wants from a security basis, and that, it seems to me, is not coming anytime soon.
So do you think Europe can handle high prices, high energy prices, and can the U.S. help alleviate some of that pain?
We're already doing everything we can. We're exporting even more LNG to Europe than Biden promised them, and that's even with the Freeport explosion. Look, Europe's in for a rough winter, especially if temperatures are lower, if we have a colder than normal winter. That said, I was reading Politico this morning, and there was an article about how Spain is requiring that shopkeepers turn off their lights at night now, and Germany and the Netherlands are decreeing that they're going to turn off the lights that light up the historic buildings at night. And I read that, and I was like, I thought you were in an energy crisis. You still had the lights on the historic buildings. I don't know why the Brandenburg Gate needs to be lit up if you're really concerned about natural gas concerns. So I wonder how much slack non-essential energy is in there that they can cut out, and then how much they can source from the United States or Canada or Qatar or some of these other countries that are exporting LNG. So I'm at Cognitive Investments, like, we are bullish on the European Union. I'm bullish on the European Union. I think people are way too down in the European Union. I think this will be a catalyst for Europe, not only politically to come together more, but, and I said this right when the war started, all Vladimir Putin has done is turned Russia into a Chinese gas station. And the corollary of that is that he has encouraged Europe to go all in on an energy transition. So, yes, it's going to be rough in European energy markets and power markets for the next year or two, but they are accelerating investment in hydrogen, nuclear, sourcing new sources of natural gas, coal, you name it. I think that Europe can stand up to this much easier in the long run than Russia can. I think that's a miscalculation from Russia. So I don't mean to minimize some of the pain, especially the disruption that we're probably going to see in the next 6 months, but I think Europe can get through that, and in the long run will be a lot stronger for it.
So last question on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. If Vladimir Putin received a call tomorrow from someone in Europe saying, look, we've negotiated with Zelensky, and if you agree to just live with what we took so far, all the land that you've taken from Ukraine, you can have that, and the war ends today, and we have a new boundary. Does he take that deal? Has he achieved enough of his strategic goals to secure Moscow to be able to walk away if he had the opportunity?
I have trouble putting myself in Putin's shoes, but if we take him on the face of what he said, he would have a few more conditions. Like, I want to guarantee that Ukraine will not be allowed in NATO. I would like the Ukrainian military to be disarmed, and he'd probably throw in a couple more just for good measure. Maybe if the economic situation in Russia is dire enough, maybe if he's feeling political pressure at home in Russia, maybe he would take that deal. But if we take him based on what he has said, and so far, I mean, like, I didn't listen to him when he said he was so worried about Ukraine. I should have, because then I would have predicted that he actually was going to invade. If we take him at his word, no, that would not be enough. And if we look at Russia's negotiation tactics in general, usually once you give them a little bit, then they're going to try and take a lot more. So my guess would be no. I don't think Putin would take that deal.
Jacob, I like to end every interview that I do with you by asking you kind of the same question. In the US, the media just runs from one big story to the next, and dominates headlines for a day, a week, whatever, and then it falls to the wayside, even though there's still a lot happening with all these big global macro issues around the world, and there's no shortage of them. And that gets to the core of my question. What's not in the media, and what haven't we talked about today that has you concerned or has got your attention? What are you looking at that maybe the average viewer isn't hearing about?
I'm going to give you two for the price of one. The first we've already alluded to, which is real estate prices going down in China. This is the most important thing you can possibly get right from a macro perspective in the world right now, period. It's something we're watching like hawks at Cognitive Investment. It's something I'm thinking about every day. If you're a normal Chinese investor or citizen, you put your savings not in the stock market, not in a bank, not underneath your mattress. You invest in real estate. The legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party is wrapped up in providing prosperity for the people. And if you can't get the real estate crisis that is emerging in China right now under control, it's going to have not just domestic implications for the Chinese Communist Party. It'll have plenty of those. It'll have global implications. Commodity prices for decades now have been buoyed by Chinese demand. They are the ones that consume all of this iron and steel and copper as they're building these developments that nobody lives in, but that the Chinese people put their money into because that's how they know that they're going to get a return on their investment. That's how the thing works in China. So if you get this situation where the Chinese people really are losing confidence in the ability of the Chinese government to keep the system going forward, it's a global macro threat. I don't think this is going to be the one that sets off the crisis. There have been similar moments in recent Chinese history, 2012, 2014, 2020. I think the more likely scenario is we're just going to see the biggest bazooka of stimulus and debt you've ever seen in your life as China tries to get the situation under control. But that's something to be watching, because if it goes the other way, it's hard for me to exaggerate what the implications are. The second thing is something that maybe your audience saw in a newspaper a couple months ago, or maybe gets in the headlines every once in a while when NASA posts a new picture of it. But this water crisis in the southwest of the United States, also has my attention. If your listeners don't know, if you go look at what the water levels are at Lake Mead and Lake Powell or on the Colorado River, the water levels are extremely low. And this is the Colorado River, and these dams provide drinking water and electricity for up to 40 million people in the Southwest. And there's just not enough agreement on how to reduce water consumption in this area. And all these different states are squabbling with each other earlier. The federal government came in a month ago and said, guys, if you in the states don't figure out how to reduce your water consumption significantly, I think by August 16th is the date, then the federal government's just going to make the cuts for you. And those cuts might be permanent going forward. So water is an issue globally. In the United States, we're actually better off if you sort of look at it at a macro level from water availability. There are other parts of the world. For instance, South America is in a generational drought right now. Turkey's been having really strong issues. If we go around the world, we can find a lot of issues where water is at the center of them. But even in the United States, you've got an issue in the Southwest United States that if we don't figure the situation out, I mean, everything from real estate to what happens in Southern California to U.S. agricultural products, because there's a lot of agricultural products that are grown from with this water as a source. That's one thing that I'm watching closely as well. And I just want to say I don't blame the media for this, and I don't blame normal listeners for not paying attention to it. That's the problem with issues like climate change. They are almost too big for us to fathom. It's hard for us to predict what's going to happen because there's so many variables, and you get that boiling the frog in the water syndrome, where it's just bit by bit, it's slowly getting worse, and we're looking around and thinking everything is fine, and looking at Nancy Pelosi over here when we have much bigger problems closer to home. So I would tell your audience to read the article about Nancy Pelosi and then put it down and go look at what Chinese real estate prices are doing, and maybe pay a little bit of attention to our own backyard and what we're going to do about the 40 million people in the Southwest who are about to lose a significant amount of the water they've become accustomed to in recent decades.
Jacob Shapiro from Cognitive Investments, always fascinating speaking with you. I appreciate the time. Thanks for joining us for this week's Global Macro Update from Malden Economics.
Thanks, Ed. See you soon.
Thank you for watching another edition of Global Macro Update from Malden Economics. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you don't miss any of these interviews. We release them every week. Also want to let you know that we have implemented closed caption. You just need to click that little button to get closed captions on YouTube. And we are working on getting all of these transcribed. If you tell us that you want a transcript, we'll make sure that we email those to you every week when we notify you of a new video. So again, thanks for watching. I'm Ed D'Agostino. See you next week.